this episode of the Heretic Hammer podcast. I am your host, Marshall, and this is my co-host, Dylan.
Hello, hello.
And today is an interesting topic. We've gone over in the past. There are a great many problems in the Imperium. And, for those problems, the Imperium as a whole has many tools. They have the Guard for normal problems, Sisters and Space Marines for the biggest or at least bigger problems, especially the meaner problems, Then they have Grey Knights, Custodians, oh my. However, many of those are a broadsword of a solution, And what happens when you need a scalpel? Well, some would say that you would need the Custodians, but they're not available. You don't, as an Imperial noble or even the High Lords of Terra, command a Custodian to do anything, because the Custodians answer to one man, and that is the Emperor himself. So what else can you do as an Inquisitor or Lord of Terra or whatnot? Well, you hire assassins is what you do.
Oh. Assassino.
Yes. Today we are going to talk about the Officio Assassinorum. They, as I alluded to previously, currently operate under the auspices of the Adeptus Administratum. There are four main temples, you could say, that we're going to focus on today, in a kind of, mostly because they're the ones that are more prevalently talked about in the 41st millennium. One of them has, I guess, in semi-recency, but I don't have a whole lot with it. So I just kind of was like, I'll stick with the four that have tabletop models and just go from there. We'll talk about the other two. There are technically six, I think, in total. There's some weird, there's one that might not exist anymore, or it might. I left that one out.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
that is going to be of the Calidus, Caluxus, Evisor, and Vindicare, which we'll get to which one's which in a moment. However, they are often used by many high-ranking officials, including Inquisitors, but they may deploy assassins with the authority of even the Senatorum, essentially one of the main governing bodies of the Imperium. And this requires a 2/3 majority of the High Lords to authorize the deployment of a single assassin. And these assassins can go to anyone and anything, right? So this is included in the Imperium and out. There is actually a 40k, or Warhammer has a series, or Games Workshop has a series on their Warhammer Plus and Warhammer TV service called Hammer and Bolter. Mm-hmm. Many of those episodes are actually very good, but one of which is actually essentially a story, because they're single episode stories. Is a story about an Inquisitor that has been marked for death by the Assassinorum, one way or the other, and is therefore has to do battle with a Calidus assassin. But that, that's just kind of an example. So it was an Inquisitor, those who would seemingly have the highest of power in the Imperium, is not without their capacity to be tested, or I guess reined in, if you will.
So anyone can be a target, is what you're saying, essentially.
Correct. Essentially, as long as the High Lords deem you, or at least 2/3 of them deem you worthy of such punishment, then that may be. There is scenarios of Inquisitors making use of assassins or whatnot, but generally, again, these kind of all have to go through a bit of bureaucracy. However, the history of assassins in the Imperium does go back to the days of the Unification Wars, as the Emperor made use of them against many enemy leaders. I mean, in the Unification Wars being that of those just getting Terra back together, right after Old Night. And he made use of these, obviously, to deal with some of those barbaric leaders that, had maybe that were going to be difficult and had vast amounts of, old tech, which, was still good tech in some capacity, because inherently humans were so advanced at that point. So you would need stuff like these assassins to deal with them. Now, the origins of the Assassinorum itself are then tied, so the actual Officio Assassinorum are traced to the times of the Great Crusade, where a pact was made on Mount Vengeance by the 6 Directors Primus.
Hold on.
Yes.
Time out.
Yeah.
Don't ask me about Mount Vengeance. Mount Vengeance,
Don't
is
ask me
it?
about it. Don't ask me about it.
Don't ask you about it. Is this an upcoming episode, or are we going to dedicate an entire episode to Mount Vengeance?
It's just GW is not the most under the nose about this shit. They're pretty on the nose.
Hang on, I got to write this down and underline it for future reference.
Look, dude, when we talk about Blood Bowl one day and we get to Nuffle, you're going to see how on the nose GW can get, all right? All right, it gets real on the nose with them sometimes. And so they decided that they were going to name one Mount Vengeance. Let's just put it down. That was the way. The 6 Directors Primus of the Assassin Clades, which were headed by the Master of Assassins, which is Malcador, because of fucking course it is.
Malcador.
One doesn't he have, we will do an episode on Malcador as a whole. But
I see. Okay, Malcador gets an episode, but Mount Vengeance we're throwing to the side. Okay.
Yeah, you know what? Yes, we are.
Yay. That'll be my birthday episode.
Which one, Mount Vengeance or Malcador?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, for the 6 Directors Primus, there were the founding clades were formed by Sire Vindicare, Evisor, Caluxus, Vanus, and Cyrus Venom. Oh, and I already.
Anemone.
Oh, and Cyrus Calidus. I didn't. I thought I said that already, and then I realized now I didn't. So we have the 6 of them along with Malcador having met, and then essentially it did eventually come down to that the assassins, of course, did end up attempting to kill Horus in the Horus Heresy upon his betrayal.
Oh, yeah, okay.
However, obviously, as you could guess based on the fact that there were a distinct number of books after this one came out with the assassins trying to kill Horus.
Yeah, they succeeded.
Yeah, they clearly succeeded.
GG.
But, so no, despite a string of attempts, with essentially kind of like fairly unheard of, and I don't believe repeated all temple joint op. From this point forward, as I mentioned, we're going to mainly talk about the 4 that kind of exist, at least as models now. But it's not necessarily clear why you don't see much of the Venus or Venenum in like the 40k. I guess, though, recently I think Vanus is used often, but I think it was used recently for, I believe, in a recent book, but they're not even on the cover, so I don't like where their position is in the greater function of the Assassinorum and the Imperium is inherently unknown. Let's put it more that way, right? It doesn't mean they don't exist anymore or that their lore isn't there, but it's just kind of one of those things where it's like until we were to see, we end up seeing them maybe fleshed out in a codex as part of the 41st, second millennium, then that's kind of where we'll have to wait and see. But for a quick note on what they are. So Vanus are assassins who are essentially like techno data specialists, those who are experts in hacking, who, use their talents to essentially determine various possible outcomes of how they could utilize missions, essentially almost utilizing them from like a predictive standpoint, like here's all the things that we can do, and then but still having the talents on their own, right? They are still expert killers and trained killers, and we'll get to how they become one in a second, but they're still experts, right? So just because they are tech experts and they do a lot of predictive stuff, it doesn't make them weak. And then Venenum, if you could kind of see the whole venom, they're poison and venom specialists. Very on the nose for what they are and what they do. They're probably the ones that I would say I saw the least sources of, but again, doesn't mean they don't exist or aren't in any books or whatnot. It's just I saw them the least.
They're just really good at being quiet assassins, and so no one knows about them.
Well, a lot of it is kind of just, over the course of the, degradation of the Imperium, kind of where did everybody kind of go in, like the way the Officio Assassinorum kind of kept its like hierarchy and the temples, like there's the feeling that one of them is missing, stuff like that. So there's a bit of mystery involved in them. But you might be asking, well, how do you become an assassin, one might say?
You kill someone.
No, not entirely. I mean, maybe.
Oh, sorry.
But
you kill someone for money.
Well, that's when you are an assassin. But how do you become one?
Oh, okay.
Yes. The first step generally is to become an orphan.
I feel like I should have seen that coming.
Yeah. So there's a school in the Imperium. It is a great school. The greatest school, sorry, called the Schola Progenia.
Schola Progenia.
This may come up in the future for a variety of reasons, honestly, when we talk about 40k lore. Honestly, we kind of touched on, I think, a little bit in the Inquisition episode. So the Schola Progenia is essentially the great school that many of the Imperium's kind of specialized soldiers go through. And they'll honestly end up there for many reasons, through nobility, through catching the eye of an inquisitor, a noble, a high-ranking officer. There are various reasons that somebody may find themselves with the privilege of going to the Schola Progenia. However, many of those who maybe either go to the Schola Progenia or even just are found orphaned by an inquisitor of such kind or whatnot, there are obviously still a variety of other ways to be found, but essentially you just kind of disappear, just like that.
Okay.
And then you find yourself in a new school, and that is of the Temples of the Assassinorum. Effectively, somebody has deemed you, especially the orphans, as eligible or as a promising, having promising eligibility for the Assassinorum program, and thus they have brought you here. And there are, and like I said, we're going to go over the 4 temples that most of the time you will see. So first up is we're just going to go over them in alphabetical order. Is going to be the Calidus Temple. They are specialize in trickery, deception, infiltration, and impersonation. So they are widely known for their use of polymorphine, which allows them to change their shape and appearance into any human and humanoid Xenos, much like Orc and Eldar. And I believe they've done it as a Tau before as well, but I'm not 100% sure. But based on what'll be the next image I'll get to, that's kind of where I get the feeling that might be the case. That being said, the majority of these assassins are female, as polymorphine works best with women. This is according to an old background book. We've been over the whole how genetics kind of these things actually work in the real world type thing in the past.
Yeah, for sure.
As it stands, essentially, it's generally, though, that polymorphine does seem to work with female DNA the best. And that's just kind of where the lore has stood and stands. And thus is generally, though, why you will almost always see a Calidus assassin with this kind of female model, especially with like the morph suit. Now, interestingly, there is in that Hammer and Bolter episode that I mentioned, the Calidus assassin does remove her hood, mask. I always kind of felt like they were a big one piece, but I guess hers isn't. But regardless, you are able to see her as kind of just this normal face. And the polymorphine drug does kind of work in that it almost kind of lets them Like they're truly morphing. Like she gets stabbed. A good example is she gets stabbed in her hand, and once like a field is taken away from her and she can move it, she's able to essentially pull her hand through the knife and it heals itself.
Okay,
like it's
that's
almost
good.
like it's like almost like this gelatin like. It almost makes them gelatin like, like it's this very like almost like
just
they can make themselves
reseals
like,
itself.
yeah, like, and they can almost just like make them like very rubbery almost, and
Ugh.
it's a weird, it's an interesting but weird scene, and like visual, but yes. So a Calidus assassin is actually one who killed Conrad Kurz.
Oh,
Granted, he had claimed that he allowed himself to be found and killed by this assassin, essentially because he saw it coming, which he did. That's actually part when we talk about Conrad in the future. This will be a whole thing, but he did in fact see his death coming. That is a long-standing. That's kind of the source of his trauma, partly, if you will. And to him, allowing himself to be killed by this assassin justifies his rebellion. Conrad, as we'll get to again in the future, like I said, is a very ends justify the means kind of guy. And his thought was that by him ending to an assassin, essentially of his father's, that it justified the fact that he rebelled in the first place. Because his father would essentially be willing to do such a thing, right?
Yeah.
As I said, we could talk about the logic and all that aside, but like that is his point. And, whether or not you are into that or like whether or not you think that's BS or you tell yourself Ave Dominus Nox and he is justified, it's just, just a matter of opinion. However, yeah. So when they do need to use weapons, they have what is called the phase sword, poison blades, and a neural shredder, which is actually seen in the previous image here. You can see the neural shredder there.
That's the neural shredder. Okay.
Yes, but especially the poison or the phase sword is possibly one of the most iconic weapons that they have, especially giving its kind of whole arm sling cool factor there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it's just the phase sword is an inherent, like it's just kind of one of those blades that it cuts through everything. It essentially has little to no like piercing weakness or things that it can't find its way in through. But it's also why it's not widely available, because they're hard as shit to make.
It also has a limited range, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see it. It's like the size of, it's like the length, it's like almost kind of the length of like the femur, or just like half a leg, so you got to get up close and personal. But I mean, that's what the Calidus Assassin is, or Calidus Assassin, sorry, is good for, is getting up close and personal. Honestly, almost all the assassins are, save for one, but we'll get to that later. Generally, though, most of them all are very good at close quarters. Well, they all are good at close quarters combat. Ones like the Calidus especially thrive in close quarters combat. Thus, the short sword does, in fact, become beneficial.
Gotcha.
But next up, we've got the Calyxus Temple, which this, especially if you are an orphan who happens to be especially not a female, and in the case especially of the Schola, because especially often those who would say who are blanks and are women in the Schola, generally you'll find may end up being in the Sisters of Silence, which is an inherently more onerous position to be in, especially for a blank, which are often not looked at positively, as we mentioned in the Custodes episode.
Mm-hmm.
However, so those who are maybe either orphaned, not looked at positively, or men, may find themselves becoming a Calyxus assassin who weaponize their anti-psyker nature. So, they are trained to essentially take their pariah gene, the blank, and amplify it to such an extent that, it will create such a realm of uncomfort to just even a non-psyker, and kind of instill this utter fear and panic in any psyker that they hunt, which is their primary target.
So it's not like disabling the psyker's abilities so much as is just like mentally throwing them off, or like,
they pretty much will. The main aspect to that is that pretty much whenever anything psychic kind of ends up coming at them, anything that would attempt to like peer the mind, anything that would attempt to affect them mentally, and like that isn't just like a physical manifestation of the warp, then it's completely useless. It will do nothing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they are anti-psyker and the essentially witch hunters to the extreme. And so these are uniquely kind of hunted down, as we mentioned, from these orphanages, if they can tell that there's a blank there, or even vat grown, just kind of due to the rarity that this temple exists in, because being a pariah is not a common thing. I mean, you're effectively being born without a soul, right? Which is how psychic works in 40k. Now, this doesn't mean you don't have, or none of them have one, but we'll kind of maybe talk about this in the future, but part of the way that these work is, or like the souls work in 40k, is a soul is kind of like two connected dots. It's almost like two copies of yourself, right? One that is in this kind of material plane, right? That, to use D&D terms, like the real universe, the physical universe, there is one that is you here. And then there is a second you in the warp that is essentially shielded and protected by your mind and your mental will, right? Your willpower. It essentially shields it from whatever crazy things are going on in the warp. So that's why it's not like, you could just be chilling at home thinking about nothing, and then all of a sudden, bam, a Tzeentch demon decided to just eat your soul randomly in the warp, and now you're a Tzeentch demon or you just die in the real world. That doesn't happen, right? That, because you essentially have this little bit of covering to you. And so that that is, but like when you learn of the warp, or you start, maybe you're psychic and you start to experiment in things, that shield is broken down and made thinner, and thus can become corrupted or eaten or whatever, or consumed, whatever it may be. But for now, but it's a blank, that other side of you is either barely there, like the tiniest sliver, or just not existent. Somehow you just exist with zero presence in the warp, which is thus kind of was what makes you that quote unquote soulless being. And thus they're inherently pretty non-emotive as a temple, right? And really helps with their terror aspect to them. So they make use of a device called the Animus Speculum, which is the thing that's kind of all in their head. And this allows them to send a deadly psychic blast, but it's not psychic in the traditional sense. It's kind of like a negative psychic energy, right? Like the anti-magic blast. And again, that's especially like the thing that can really nullify a psyker's attempts at dealing with you, if they even somehow are not writhing on the ground in like utter despair and pain. If they somehow are strong enough to have all that minute amount of resistance to you to try to attack the Caluxus, that firing this stuff would just like eat through any of the psychic energies or attacks that are lodged their way. So these are honestly looked at as one of the most feared assassins. And I mean, like, I can't remember. I kind of forgot about this until just now, so I forgot to look up the quote. But essentially, like, I think it was an Eldar that had like essentially stated that the Caluxus assassin is quite possibly the most inhumane thing created by the Imperium.
That's saying something.
It is. It really is. And thus one of the kind of notable things that they have done in the past is actually during the Second Agrellan campaign, a Calyxus assassin was actually dispatched or was attached to an Officio execution force. So essentially a small grouping of, I don't believe it's always just assassins. I think it's like assassin. It can be like assassins and other kind of highly trained officials. I don't know, like inquisitors, stuff like that. But their job is to go find a target and deal with them. And in so just really lost it there. And in so killed Anva, the ethereal supreme of the Tau Empire.
Oh,
yes. So because here's the funny thing, right? Like, and I always love this art because this is GW art, right? And the thing is, Tau, you know, I talked about that attached soul in the warp, right? Well, you know, the Taus, the reason we talked about this, they're essentially almost immune to psychic because they are, you know, their presence, that part of them, that copy of them in the warp is so minuscule that like no demons or even chaos gods find it appealing in any way. You know, it's like looking at the shred, that like shredded piece that, you know, comes off the Reese's peanut butter cup wrapper, you know, that like shredded chocolate. Yeah. When you look at that, you don't go, damn, I need to lick that up. That's the best part. Mm-hmm. You leave it in the wrapper and you throw away with it, and it gets thrown away with it. That's how the chaos gods look at Tau soul.
They're just whatever.
Sure, if you bunched enough of them up, maybe there's some value in there, but that's a lot of work. But nevertheless, in this artwork, you see even the Tau, just the soldiers, these fire warriors, are affected greatly by this Calyxus assassin. Now, granted, interestingly, Anva and his like guardians there don't seem to be nearly as affected. He's pretty like he's pretty non-caring.
He
about
seems
the whole
kind of chill about the whole ordeal.
Yeah. He's not about to be, given that he's going to die. But it's interesting to me with this art. But I always kind of wonder if that is essentially just part of the way that they emit this energy, right? That they have some control in the way that they deal with it. But I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, effectively, this Calyxus assassin clearly just ends up waltzing right in. It's just like, yeah, you're done. Bang. And then, you know, anybody else could just easily deal with these Tau fire warriors, you know. Next up, though, the Eversor Temple, which takes Clockwork Orange, gives them a mix of meth cracroids, and then a large amount of weapons. Essentially, the fuck it button.
That's a winning combination.
Yeah, when you don't need to be as extreme as an exterminatus almost, right? You're trying to wipe a battlefield or a large base, right? You're not trying to erase the planet, but you want a large grouping of whatever, of enemies dead. You just want them gone. The Eversor is what you call for. So their bodies are modified to turn them into these superb killing machines, as seen here, taking on what looks to be a Commander Farsight. I don't really know the source of this image. It's GW image, but I don't necessarily know its source, because Farsight is still alive, and thus if he at least then maybe succeeded to survive this Eversor assassin, which would be uncommon, but has to happen in the past.
Yeah.
But yes, their bodies are modified to make them these superb killing machines, as I noted, and include augmentations that strain the limits of their human physiology. And I mean this literally in a second here. Like, so through the use of bionics and genetic alterations, the assassin is implanted with adrenal ducts, which speed up the brain's higher functions and allowing them to make complex calculations and tactical decisions in seconds. Now, as I mentioned, they're at the limits. So if they detect that their heart or brain will begin to like cease function soon, and this could happen through all the drugs, or knowing that maybe they are wounded and are dying, because I should note they're very conscious of everything that they're doing, right? The part of that Clockwork Orange is the loyalty that they are kind of fed into, right? To be extremely loyal. Knowing that the thing is, knowing this could happen, they will do everything they can to essentially get to that last ditch effort to get to their primary target, because they know they're about to explode. Yeah, when an Eversword dies, they blow up, and it's not like a small explosion.
Okay, yeah. So you're talking just literally they explode. The body
They
explodes.
just blow up.
Do they have a bomb inside of them? Like how? Why? What's the reason for it?
I mean, it is all of their weaponry. It's a mix of all their weaponry. I imagine there is some explosives in that, as well as just the essentially crazy force of which their bodies explode. Just like the pure kinetic energy can just delete someone next to you.
Wow. The power of static electricity.
Yeah. Like I said, I have much expectation that explosives are involved. I mean, granted, you have all of the machinery and bionics, remember, that are also implanted in them. So there is machinery and stuff that then will also, essentially have a way to explode out while they are being pushed with these drugs to go beyond psychotic. Like I said, they are cognizant of all their actions, so they know what objectives they need to go do, right? They can't just like let loose somebody who has nothing going on, right? Or no ideas, because otherwise they'll never get anything done. They'll kill allies. They'll just erase the battlefield. They won't even get to the objective, right? They'll go find some random village that they happen to land nearby and go crazy, right? If they have no cognition anymore, and it's just pure psychosis, then it would be completely inefficient.
Yeah,
and if the Assassinarium wants anything, it's efficiency. So they're able to then make these decisions for themselves, as I mentioned, and check their stability, make sure they don't. And then similarly, they will make sure they don't do harm to nearby inquisitors or loyalists. They'll, if there are space marines around, they'll acknowledge those are space marines, and they'll move the other way. But inevitably, similarly, they're also told to keep clear, because there are times, obviously, where they very much could go off be in a blind rage for a moment and not realize what's going on. And then, oops, I killed the space marine. Well, he was in my path.
Mm-hmm.
So while they are cognizant, it does not mean that they are without danger to even the allies around them, and effectively are told to be kept away. However, both before they go into any of these drops or anything, they are kept in cryostasis between missions. This obviously is to not only help prolong their life, as obviously if left in their general state, they would probably only last a short while, because, through either
the physical
drugs
and mental toll of existing, in the state that they live in.
Yeah, exactly. That chance for explosion is a little bit more likely. Now, that does not mean that, every mission that they are going to hit this explosion, but they obviously need to ensure that they are kept in a prime shape for a while. So there is times where these assassins, quote unquote, live for centuries. They'll maybe go 50 years not without seeing a mission. But, for them, they just got back from the one before that.
So they don't have to follow the same rules as like raw meat. Like they can be thrown back into cryostasis once their job's done, and then just like unfrozen again
Yeah, as far as I saw, they're kind of able to just move, kind of get in and out for a few times. There is essentially a permastasis that they can get put into, which is kind of meant to be the like, I think I'm getting close, or I feel like I'm losing my capacity here. And in that scenario, they'll honestly just kind of be put into this permanent stasis. Now, there has been times where they've been removed from it, and I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe maybe we'll do it for some last hurrahs. But generally, I kind of saw that the permastasis is essentially just kind of like it's like an effective death until you finally kind of do get that chance to maybe just get sent out to actually pass or explode, which is what would happen when you pass, I guess. Regardless,
mm-hmm.
Semantics aside, let's talk about the Vindicare Temple.
Vindicare.
Yes, the snipers.
Okay, I was wondering. I was wondering if there was going to be like a dedicated sniper.
Yes, and thus also then the experts of vengeance.
Vengeance.
They have a special sniper called the Exodus rifle.
Cool.
The funny part about the way it's spelt, though, is it's not Exodus, it's Exitus. So like exit us.
Oh, come on. No way. Exitus?
That's how I spelt it. That's all I can say. Unless it was a misspelling from what I was going through.
This episode is a gold mine of just like crazy Games Workshop terms.
One day we're gonna go over old lore, just as a fun like kind of meme episode.
The sacred texts.
Oh, dude, some of the stuff from back in the day. Oh, especially like very early on. Honestly, it's even up to like the early 2000s. It's bad. Sometimes in a funny way, a funny good way, but man. But I would say out of all the so the Exodus rifle, I almost forgot to actually get to it. Effectively they're obviously trained to utilize this rifle so they will take out their target with but a single bullet. And it is chambered to fire a variety of specialized ammunition types, obviously depending on the mission, the plan, and all that. So they are then equipped to take out targets ranging from well-shielded individuals to monstrous beasts and even vehicles, kind of whatever task has been brought to them. And they are thus trained to remove essentially all forms of emotion. While I noted that the Calidus assassin, or the Caluxus assassin is fairly less emotive by nature of being the blank, especially then a very anti-blank. It is not that they are generally without, that they still have some feelings, wants, desires, whatever, right? The Vindicare is generally trained to remove all such emotions, but then also thus hold of total loyalty as a result. They thus also then are generally seen with their spy mask, which can scan a wide spectrum to pick out heat, energy sources over vastly long distances. And I mean vastly. The end of that Hammer and Bolter episode sees our captured Calidus assassin, because she quote unquote loses the fight against the Inquisitor and is brought to an interrogation room, which is exactly where she was meant to bring him, as she turns her head slightly, revealing a Vindicare assassin on top of a nearby spacecraft that was brought by what was supposed to be a rival Inquisitor, on the top, waiting the whole time, and takes one shot through the porthole to the Inquisitor's head, ending him with one shot across a segment of space.
Wow.
So these things see from very far. Second fun story was there is a Dark Eldar pilot, Skyknife, who was killed by a Vindicare assassin. His name was, I'm going to say this probably very wrong, Degedris Garamak.
Rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, he was killed, or the Dark Eldar was killed, Skyknife was killed by Degedris after the sniper had waited in position for this opportunity for 6 years.
As in 6 years in one spot?
In one spot.
6 years not moving, just
there,
camping out like the end, just hanging out in the jungles of Russia.
Completely planned out for this whole 6 years, knowing that he would get lured here one way or the other by either assistance, by careful planning, knowing his routes, knowing what the Sky Knife likes to do, knowing his farming, knowing whatever, planned out and waited for that 6 years, just staying up in his perch, waiting.
Wow.
Thus then, though, we can get into there is one great story that assassins are a part of, which is kind of in a way secretly a knight's book, because it's called Assassinorum Kingmaker. And it generally features this Calidus and Vindicare assassin. This is where I had supposedly seen that there is a Vannis assassin also part of this story, but they're not on the cover, so we don't get to see a visual representation of them. And I don't know, I have not read this book, so I do not know their involvement.
Okay.
So that's why I won't speak to that. But I've been told by anybody who has ever read it that it is an amazing book. It is wonderful for getting to know night houses for the assassins, and just overall good, good story. But yes, Assassinorum Kingmaker. Otherwise, there is Nemesis, the Horus Heresy book that I spoke of, where essentially Horus's and the Emperor's assassins deal with each other and try to, as inevitably, take care of Horus.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, otherwise, going to tabletop, the assassins are generally used as part of the Agents of the Imperium Codex, but often are used as kind of single unit sub-ins or supplementary units into just about any Imperial army. There was a classic thing for a long time where you would just add a Vindicare or Calidus assassin to your army just to kind of help you facilitate objectives or get rid of key targets because they are inherently cheap, easy to add to the army as one unit. And they get a special rule. They all have a special rule called Lone App, which makes them untargetable up until they are within 12 inches of said unit. They're always lone operatives, and they're great models to either kit bash, create fun proxies with, experiment, because these are the 4 models you will see, right? Like you generally see them as, this grouping. But you're like, I want to make an assassin, could take varying portions of these kits or whatnot, and you could make them your own, do something interesting. I said, through kit bashing, creating proxies. They do not always, while they are often made to look like this, they do not always have to be. Really, the main thing, especially for like WYSIWYG concerns, it's really just kind of like the weapons. The weapons are the only things that should probably be the same or look the same, right? So, like the Eversaur should kind of always have these, hand claws and kind of injector, stabby bolt pistol. The Calidus should always have the phase sword and neuro pistol. The Vindicare should always have a sniper. The Caluxus should have some form of this kind of anti-psyker helmet thing. But anything outside of that, go nuts. Have fun.
It definitely feels like the weapons are a big part of what ends up defining each of these temples.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, so that's why it's so key to do so. I did forget to add it. I was gonna say there is a Vannis, I think, model for Horus Heresy, but it's not usable in 40k. So I did forget to add that though, but it was there. But still, like, it's pretty much about whatever their specialty gear or weapons are. And then you can tell, like, okay, yes, that is a Calidus, or yes, that is clearly a Vindicare.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, anything else you'd like to know about the assassins?
So who is What is the highest? I've been thinking about this since essentially the beginning. What is the highest rank in the Imperium that an assassin could theoretically be ordered to kill?
I would honestly, I'd probably say the. Let me check something actually here. Let's see. A previous Grand Master of the Assassinorum had orchestrated the assassination of a number of High Lords of Terra. But the thing is, I believe that was definitely unsanctioned. That was a straight up just coup. That question would end up being Inquisitors and other just like high gubernatorial lords. So not the High Lords of Terra, but like very high ranking nobles. Honestly, I very much even could see them going after a rogue trader.
Okay.
As far as I know, that's, within an entire realm of possibility. Because, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, whilst they effectively have like a semi-diplomatic immunity as rogue traders, they are not without, not without consequences. You could still stray too far from the sun as a rogue trader, right? And if, maybe you create, you're too powerful, say even for an Inquisitor to deal with, then an assassin may very well come your way.
Mm-hmm.
So honestly, I think outside of just the High Lords of Terra themselves, and probably a Custodes, I don't think anybody is particularly immune to the Assassinorum. Granted, there are various times where it would be a very bad idea to say do that. For example, I think early on they have attempted to send the assassins against Rubute Gilliman, like early on, maybe. They saw him as much of a threat, which they did. The problem was obviously he had way too much backing.
Yeah.
And let's be real. There would have been almost like a secondary, like, turning of many Space Marines if they assassinated Rubute Gilliman. And like that wouldn't have sat well. Especially given that one of the High Lords of Terra that helped make these calls is also a custodian who probably would not have necessarily been as up to that concept.
Yeah, for sure.
So generally I would say it'd be just like the high ranking nobles and Inquisitors are probably the highest it gets. But honestly, those are the highest ranking people. Just below that High Lords of Terra, who are only then just below the Emperor.
The Emperor himself, yeah.
But anything else before we head out here?
No. I'm trying to decide which is my favorite, or at least which I think is like the coolest. Because I feel like the Calidus Temple has the coolest weapons. It's really hard to beat the Baraka Phase Sword.
Yes.
But I find like everything to do with the Eversor is like the most fascinating thing. And everything about their design is just so like Rob Liefeld 90s edge.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
In a really like distinct, interesting way. So
yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if that inherently is part of the inspiration. Yeah,
for sure.
Because you're looking at that's around when they probably were made in the first place. It was in the 90s. So I think there's a good chance that would be the case.
Skulls were in, to put it lightly.
Well, and you even still get the skulls with the Calyxus, but I agree.
It's true.
My two favorites generally are the Calidus and the Vindicare. I've always been a bit of a sucker for a sniper. And I think the utter patience is also what I really appreciate about them. But honestly, I think the Calidus takes it for me. I love the polymorphy kind of thing. I think it just really makes them interesting as just like as like a tool.
Yeah, no, that is a really cool thing.
Yeah, I always think that makes, because it's like such like a perfect infiltrating assassin motif, to be able to
Definitely,
essentially wear the face of someone else, which inherently is what makes the Alpha Legion so interesting. But regardless, this is but one assassin. However, the problem with liking the Calidus the most is that, unfortunately, it's kind of like liking Guard of War, Don't go on DeviantArt. don't do it.
I was like, in my head, I was like, there's a couple ways he could be going with this, and it's probably the worst one. And it was indeed the worst one.
Yeah. Gamers, man.
Gamers. Gamers in their workshops.
Nevertheless, that is going to be it for this episode. Tune in next week for, I think it's kind of going to be one of two topics. I've not fully settled on them. But after the episode ends and we're done recording, I'm going to go over them with Dylan and we'll pick which one we're going to do.
Cool.
Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.